Hello, everyone. Welcome to my show. Autumn is here. Today we have a wonderful show. We are going to speak to actually a director and an actress. And we're going to speak to them on the film that they made, Familiar Touch. Right now, welcome to my show, the director of Familiar Touch, Miss Sarah Friedland. How are you?
Good. Thanks so much for having us.
And we're also going to talk to Miss Kathleen Chalfant. Welcome to the show, Kathleen.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. I love the film. I saw the film and I got a chance to really kind of experience it and experience it with an audience, which was really good. And I just want to just tell me a little bit about yourself, Sarah, and about the idea for doing this film.
Yeah. So, first of all, thanks for having us on the podcast. It's great to be here. My background is primarily in making dance films. This is my first narrative feature, but in those years of making dance films, I also worked as a caregiver to artists with dementia, and that work experience led me to start teaching filmmaking to older adults. And those two professional experiences really shaped the writing of Familiar Touch, and that they both really changed how I viewed aging and age identity and the sort of intimacy and skill of caregiving work. But the original idea for the film came from my paternal grandmother. She was a poetry editor and an intellectual, and someone whose sense of self was very much rooted in her linguistic expression. And when she developed dementia, she became nonverbal after her dementia progressed after a few years. And at the time, my family, in grieving that experience and grieving the person they knew who was changing, they started speaking about her almost as in the past tense, as if she were no longer there. And yet she was so physically expressive in other ways. And that gap between the person we spoke about as absent and the person that remained in front of us, just expressing herself through other means, really haunted me for many years. And that was the kind of initial spark for wanting to make a coming of old age film and make a film that showed the person who persisted and her view of herself and the view of the world around her, rather than making a film from the perspective of adult children, which is often the perspective we get in films about this subject.
Yeah, so it was important for you to have the perspective from the person that was already going through it.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is not only Ruth's story, but it's Ruth's perspective.
Okay. So Kathleen, you play Ruth Goldman, and a wonderful performance. And how was it? What drew you to this character and to this film?
Well, first of all, it's a beautifully written film, so that to be just part of it as a work of art was something that was very interesting to me. The other thing that drew me to it immediately was that my best friend, who is a playwright named Sybil Pearson, is going through life with dementia. And at the time that I got the script of Familiar Touch, Ruth was in about the same place as my friend Sybil was. So that I knew a lot about Ruth because of the time I'd spent with my best friend.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think it's interesting that when people do films and talk about these things, they have it in a setting of someone's home. Now, Sarah, you took it to another location, which is very important. And can you tell us why you decided to take it to an assisted living and film your film in that environment where Ruth is going through all these different things in a different environment than her home?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll start by saying that in my view, the most important thing when it comes to care is access and choice. I think we live in a country in which care is prohibitively expensive. Ruth is obviously quite a privileged character that's depicted in the film, that she's able to afford a very nice care facility. And I'll just say it's very important to Kathy and I both that we have a greater investment in the care infrastructure of this country so that people can afford and access whatever care they choose, whether that's at home in a community setting or in a private care community or retirement community. The choice to set this within an assisted living facility came from two places. One was personal. My own grandmother, originally with her, the goal was for her to age in place at home. But like many people with dementia, she experienced a lot of anxiety and paranoia around people that she didn't know coming into her home. And so when my father and aunt started hiring care workers to do home care, the presence of people she didn't know in her home of decades caused her more distress than anything else. She couldn't understand why there were these strangers in her home. And so it became untenable for her to be cared for at home. And so finding a memory care facility was the sort of only choice after home care didn't work for her. So that part of it was that sort of personal experience. And I think the other is care settings in general are very stigmatized in our country. And part of that has to do with the history of inadequate care in America, that there are many care settings where people on both sides of the caregiving equation are under-resourced, both care workers and care recipients. But the thing that I found was that so much of the stigma has to do with people's fears of aging and the idea that any place where individuals are aging and receiving care, that those are places where people go to die rather than places where people continue to live. And my experience, working as a caregiver in my 20s is that so many of my young friends would say, oh, your job must be so depressing. And it wasn't. It was actually the most joyful job I'd ever had working as a caregiver. There was so much everyday poetry and absurdity and connection. And I wanted to show a care setting in which we see that being in a place, being in an aging community doesn't mean that people are waiting to die. They continue to live, and that the people who work there are enormously skilled and talented. And we don't see that. We see this sort of one flew over the cuckoo's nest kind of clinical psych ward version of care facilities, which doesn't really honor the fact that so many people choose make choices around how they want to be cared for, and a community setting is their choice. And likewise, that so many, we don't see care workers on screen with depictions that show just the immense skill that they bring to this work. So it was important to me to show that sense of life and vitality and the value of this labor.
It's very interesting because people don't realize that people with dementia, they still deserve to live. You can live with dementia, and if you know about it and you have support and you are a little bit more prepared and familiar with it, you'll be able to kind of get the proper support that will help the person to live and help the caregiver, to be able to aid that person. So there was a pivotal part in the movie when she went into the kitchen, and I love that part where she kind of connected to herself, and she was able to kind of like come alive. Now I'm going to ask both of you a question, but I'm going to ask you, Kathleen, first. Like, it seemed like you came alive in there. How did that feel doing that scene?
Well, that was a wonderful scene to do. But I have to say that every scene was a wonderful scene to do, because you were saying earlier that people with dementia can live. I think the truth is people with dementia do live. Human beings live until they don't. And you're living every single moment, some in joy, some in fear, some in hope, and some just every day. So that from Ruth's point of view, going into the kitchen and using her knife skills was every day.
Yeah.
Whereas for everybody else, it was an extraordinary moment.
Okay. Yes. Yes. So, Sarah, how did that come about? Why
And now,
that character, that particular thing to do? How did you connect that?
And I mean, when I was a caregiver, one of the things that I noticed with my clients is that with dementia, you get to sort of witness all of the selves a person has been, their child self, their teenage self, their young adult self. There's a wonderful writer named Lynn Segal who writes about this idea of temporal vertigo, not for people with memory loss, but more generally for older adults, that you can experience all of the people you've been and they kind of bubble up in the moment, and you're sort of all ages and no ages. And I noticed that when I was a caregiver. And it was such a privilege to get to meet, younger versions of my clients in the moment. And I think oftentimes with depicting dementia, people's losses are foregrounded in our stories, what they can no longer do, and what they're grieving, and as opposed to showing what they carry with them. And Kathleen has said that the last thing to go for Ruth will be her knife skills, that the muscle memory of that will remain with her till the end. And I wanted to show the immense creativity and capacity of Ruth that she carries with her. And I'm, was imagining that she wakes up one morning and thinks she's late for a shift at work. I think she probably was a line cook at a diner or a cafe in Brooklyn in her young adult years. And that version of her is the one that shows up that morning. So I wanted to show the Ruth that persists, not just the Ruth that's lost.
That's great. That's great because people, need to know that. You have to meet them where they're at. So, there'll be good days, there'll be bad days, and you have to meet them where they're at. And they may not be the same as what you're used to, but they still have fire in them. They still have value in them. And you have to see it and guide them to that and, enjoy that with them because they just kind of went along with it. And it was great. It was very good doing that. I have a question for you, Sarah. How does it feel to have a film? And for me, this film is like, we look at films and we enjoy them. And then when we leave, it's just something to talk about. This film is a little different. This film is something that gives people some awareness, gives people some information, and they take it with them. I noticed that when I watched it, people were quiet at the end. And at one point, I'm a writer and I write plays and sometimes, and I had something like that where I had a reading, and it was the first time that everybody was quiet, and my reading was about Alzheimer's, and I thought I bombed, and I didn't know what to do, but I stood up and I just had to be brave and say something, and no one said anything, and then when the director says, "Well, are there any questions?" Everyone raised their hand. Because people were taking it in, and they told us they were taking it in. They were relating to it. They were thinking about it. And that's how I felt when I saw your film. It was like, people are taking this in, and they're going to take it home, and they're going to either relate to it or think about even their lives. Like, this, maybe I need to get tested. Maybe I need to know more about this. So how does it feel to have a film where it's not going to end at the movie theater? It's going to go into their lives. How does that feel?
I mean, it's so gratifying. This film took over from my first draft to it premiering at the Venice Film Festival was over a decade.
Mm-hmm.
And so you carry something with you for that long as an artist. Yeah, there's a relief in it being no longer yours, because you want it to move people. You want it to touch people. I think the best experience of cinema is that you go into a dark room with strangers and you walk out a slightly different person, that something shifts in your subconscious, in your thinking, in your body. And as the maker, you can't have that experience. I watch the film and I see all the mechanisms of us making it. And so to know that it is having that effect on people is an extraordinary feeling, because that's what you aim. I think that's why we make art, for people to relate to their own humanity and to have some sort of transformative experience in terms of how they relate to it. So it's wonderfully gratifying, and I hope that it helps people feel less alone.
Mhm.
You know, aging and caregiving, they are universal. You know, we tend to think about care as an experience of dependency that we have as babies and as older adults. But care is something we give and receive throughout our whole lives. You know, our life itself is an experience of interdependence. And yet we live in a society in America where aging and care are incredibly stigmatized. And people, one of the things I've noticed of people coming to talk to Kathleen and I after the silence.
The interior life of Ruth, so that Ruth's interior life is a human being's interior life, and it's recognized by people of all ages. That's incredibly gratifying and moving, and reminds me that there is a thing called humanity, and it persists until we're gone, until wherever we go after we go.
So how was it working together? How was it working together?
The best. I mean, this was my first time directing professional actors. I'm coming from working mainly with dancers and non-professional performers. And so to watch Kathleen embody this character that had sort of dried up on the page, you know, I think that's the danger of a film taking this long, is that the characters can become sort of tired to you. And to watch Kathleen make Ruth her own was extraordinary. I learned so much from her about artistry, integrity, performance, collaboration. And I think the time we had on set was wonderfully joyful. And I think that goes back to the sort of question of how we think about care facilities. But we had quite a lot of fun on set. It's you know, Kathy's gift to me was not only in bringing this character to life, but of instilling in me a desire to keep working with actors. You know, this was my first fully scripted fictional film, and I genuinely didn't know if that was a mode that I would keep working in. I wanted to, but I didn't know if I'd be any good at it. And the experience of working with her has made me want to do this for the rest of my life. So
Awesome.
it's a gift.
Very sweet. Very sweet.
And my experience with Sarah is that I'd never have known that this was her first movie if I didn't know that it was her first movie. From the moment, first of all, we didn't have any time. We had to end the movie on the 1st of July because the Screen Actors Guild strike was going to begin then. So it meant that we had 18 and a half days to shoot the movie. But from the very first moment that we stepped onto the set together, I trusted Sarah completely. And this movie is not the movie of a novice filmmaker. This movie is the movie of an important artist. And I'm not the only person who thinks that. The last Sunday, the person who moderated our question and answer was the brilliant actor and filmmaker and great lover of film, John Turturro. And John was blown away
Awesome.
by the thing that Sarah had made and the maturity and artistry of the things she'd made.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I did have a question about what would you say to a caregiver after you've gone through this experience, all your experience? Many caregivers get involved with being a caregiver to their parent, and they don't even understand what they'll have to go through because sometimes it's for a long period of time. What would you say to a caregiver going into this with someone who has dementia or memory loss? What would you say to encourage them? Either one, you can answer.
It helped.
Mhm.
The first thing is, as Sarah said before, people in this circumstance feel enormously isolated. And what you need to do, the caregiver needs to reach out to seek help, find other people going through this situation, find a community to. That's, I think, the most important thing. And also to understand that the experience of dementia doesn't feel the same inside as it does observing it from the outside.
Wow, that's powerful.
That, yeah.
Sarah, what would you share?
Yeah, I would say to try not to let the grief overwhelm the person that remains. I think if you can try to look for the different versions of that person you love emerging as opposed to the version that is no longer there, that would be my encouragement. I think sometimes our sense of loss can eclipse the person that remains. So to look for who remains rather than who is lost.
Oh, okay. That's great. Well, thank you so much for taking some time to give us some information about the film on Ornaments Here. It's a wonderful film. As I said before, my podcast is about getting people more involved with their aging parents and helping them to deal with, life as aging, as they're aging, and to support them and to know that there's support out there and they're not alone and there are other people going through. So your film does that. It gives people a reference point, something to think about. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I know you're at the Film Forum now. I'm sure are you going on tour in different places? Where will you be next?
Yes, so you're speaking to us both right now in Los Angeles. We just arrived. We open in LA and Chicago and Detroit and Toronto and Santa Barbara. And we open in about 15 more cities this Friday. So people can go to www.familiartouchfilm.com and you can put in your zip code and find the closest cinema near you, since we're coming to about 30 different cities in the coming weeks.
Awesome. That's great. Well, I wish you luck. And thank you for your work in this and putting this together. It was a wonderful film, and I'm sure people will relate and take it home with them, and it will help them in their lives. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.